I say, number one, there are many mental health professionals around the world who believe in evil spirits. I mean, is it a majority? Probably not, but it's a significant number.
Welcome to the Deadly Departed podcast, where the veil between the living and the dead is just a whisper away. I'm Jock, and along with my colleagues in Paranormal Daily News, we will be your guides through the shadowy realms of the paranormal and the unexplained. In each episode, we will dive into the eerie and the enigmatic with the help of today's leading experts in parapsychology, science, and the supernatural. Prepare to uncover the secrets that lurk in the dark and explore the mysteries that defy explanation. Let's embark on this journey now. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Jock here. This is Deadly Departed. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, you are going to see a good friend of mine here, Dr. Richard Gallagher, who, if you have been following us for a long time, you'll recognize Richard from one of my other episodes, actually. I'm delighted to have him back, and I think we're going to jump into a great conversation that actually Richard and I talk about every time we have a good chat about mental health, possessions, obsessions, spiritual crisis, or effectively even religious crisis. Which is really important in today's day and age. Now, if you've been following the news, you'll notice that the Catholic Church has been growing in the US. There's been a massive surgence of people converting and going back to Catholicism and actually converting to Catholicism. And of course, that brings with it a lot of potential misunderstandings around religious experience, mystical experiences, and the potential of mental health that may borderline into something that goes way beyond maybe psychiatry or psychology. And that's what we're here to talk about today. Richard, welcome back to the show. I'm really glad to have you back.
Thank you, Jock. It's nice to see you and nice to be back on the show.
Now, obviously, for anybody who's watching, this is a great book, one of my favorite books, Demonic Force. Go and read it. We'll talk about that. But let's talk a little bit about your work, carrying on from what we did in another episode. Your experience in mental health as a psychiatrist and how you really challenged the materialism, the materialistic aspect of the science, going beyond the science to recognize that there are spiritual problems that go beyond mental health.
Well, a little bit of, the background to the question. So I am a professor of psychiatry at New York Medical College. I'm also a psychoanalyst at Columbia, and I also teach at a Catholic seminary. I teach this whole subject of demonology, really. So on the one hand, I am a Catholic, and on the other hand, I am a mainstream psychiatrist. So I accept a lot of the findings of science. I'm not in any way anti-science. We do have to recognize, though, that some aspects of the scientific paradigm can exclude the non-material.
Yeah.
I'm obviously not a materialist, but again, that doesn't put me so far out of the mainstream. There are many Christian, Jewish, even Muslim psychiatrists. I know many of these individuals who, practice their faith and also are pretty accepted mainstream psychiatrists. So, the question becomes how you put it together, how you understand that, mankind is body and soul, and sometimes you have to address the brain and disturbances of the brain, and other times people's problems are go beyond even normal psychological issues to the spiritual. I think the cases you're referring to are cases I never volunteered to see. I was asked to evaluate some people with what you and I'm sure, would regard as, beyond the naturalistic,
Yes.
beyond the materialistic, that they have overt spiritual problems.
Yeah.
Now, since they're problems, in my case, we're primarily talking about demonic attacks. And yes, it is true that a fair amount of psychiatrists may be skeptical of that. We're all aware of, say, psychotic individuals who only imagine or are delusional that they're being attacked by evil spirits. But then there are the, dramatic cases, many of which I have consulted upon over the years, and
Mm.
these are cases of people who say will go into a possessed state or will be overtly attacked by an evil spirit. And of course, that requires, sometimes it requires some psychological help too, but at heart, it requires something beyond psychiatry. It requires spiritual assistance.
If you are enjoying this episode of Deadly Departed, then please share it with your colleagues or share it with your friends. And if you've got any ideas on anyone that you would like us to invite onto the podcast for an interview, then please let us know. Once again, thank you for joining us today. And please remember and subscribe. God bless. Now, David Luke obviously did a lot of work in bringing in recognition, if you like, into the DSM-5, where there has to be, there's some form of maybe a little bit of an understanding of a spiritual problem. It doesn't obviously mention demonic. It just said obviously a spiritual or religious problem. But do you think that there needs to be more work in our field to perhaps even expand on what the DSM-5 says? Because there is obviously cases that go beyond the realm of psychiatry or psychology and science because of anomalous phenomena that's perhaps experienced in potential cases. And do you think that if there is more of a change or more research done into it, that we could perhaps open the field even more and maybe get it accepted as a religious problem, and to recognize spiritual intelligences, demons, as being realistically a problem in the mental health field?
Well, I have a different perspective. I think the DSM system works as far as it goes,
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I don't necessarily want, the medical or the psychiatric community to dabble, to cross over into, different philosophical viewpoints.
Right.
In other words, I think we have to keep those fields somewhat separate. I mean, in my book, Demonic Foes, as you know, I do a careful distinction between spiritual conditions and psychiatric conditions. Now, psychiatric conditions in themselves, we use something called the biopsychosocial model. In other words, we recognize that there are things beyond that can be just studied biologically. We have to bring in psychology. In some ways, we even have to bring in social factors. But for psychiatry to get overly involved, Jock, in, I'll use the word pontificating, attempting to explain using mainstream scientific categories, the demonic. I think opens a can of worms, So, what religious or spiritual viewpoint do you accept, Because there's such a diversity even within, the spiritual community about some of these phenomena that
Yeah.
I think it's better, you keep things separate. What I say in my book is that, it's important to make careful distinctions. Thank you. Got my allergies today. It's important to make proper distinctions between overt spiritual attacks. And again, what I'm primarily talking about there is, as attacks, I'm talking about, it implies evil spirits.
Yeah.
Between overt interference and attacks by evil spirits and, otherwise, psychiatric conditions. I think that distinction is so important that I'd be leery of, say the American Psychiatric Association, which writes the DSM, getting overly mixed up in it, because it would open so many controversies that I think they have to stay a little neutral on that subject. Trust me, I know many psychiatrists around the world who believe exactly the way I do. They probably don't have, as much experience as I've had, because, I've probably seen more of these cases. I get calls from all over the world, and I've seen more of these cases. I'm also a member of an international association,
Yes.
the Catholic Association, as a scientific advisor. So, I've seen a tremendous amount of these cases. My former academic chairman, who is a Catholic, he's retired now, but he wrote that I've seen more of these cases than any doctor in the world, and probably in history. So I have this evidence base that allows me to speak out about it with confidence and all that. But I don't mean to imply that, there are plenty of Christian and Catholic psychiatrists who essentially, believe what I do. And, we all kind of have to use our own wits to differentiate those two conditions. I don't particularly think it's a good idea to have anything official from the American Psychiatric Association attempting to tease that out, because you got to remember, I'm very committed to the scientific method.
Yes, you are. Yeah. And that's what I love about your work, actually, is you are
but the
very much
scientific
empirical.
but the scientific method can only take you so far.
Yes.
Then you have to realize that there are, non-material realities that are impossible to, adjudicate by what we now know as the modern scientific method. You can't do experiments. When you're dealing with evil spirits.
No, no, absolutely. No, but I think what's important, though, for people to recognize out there as well, is that when we're looking at science, some of the phenomena that is experienced, the anomalous phenomena, goes beyond scientific understanding. And you make that very clear in Demonic Force. You make that clear in the cases that we've discussed, and even the work, in the past with other cases. There's clearly phenomena that goes beyond the realms of scientific understanding. And that, to me, is a massive move forward, a massive sign. And for someone like yourself to come out with the history and the professionalism and the skills that you have to effectively kind of change the paradigm within science, because of your approach to it, it surely begs the question that we should be looking at it more of a serious issue. Obviously, there's cases that grow that are developing all the time, and it involves and also I want to also make it clear that when we talk about this, Richard, as well, that yes, we're from a Catholicism point of view, because we both understand that, but there are strategies, there are histories within all faiths within the Muslim faith, within Buddhism. And so it's not just strictly down to the Christianity that demons exist. They're named and they're understood as different concepts in various fields. But I think the parallel is that experiences, lived experience, and anomalous phenomena that goes beyond science should make us think and question more.
Well, thank you for the compliment, and I don't disagree with the way you're framing it. It's just that, you know, the way the word science is used in the modern world is not necessarily, you know, here I'm going to put my former classicist hat on from Princeton. You know, the word science really means knowledge.
Yeah.
And you know, I believe that what I write about, Jock, is genuine knowledge. It's just that it doesn't fit the paradigm, if you will, of being able to do scientific experiments. In other words, you know, you know, when you're dealing with you know, even human beings, but especially when you're dealing with evil spirits, you're dealing with creatures that want to confuse people and want to hide people. They're not going to be able to be subject for experimentation in a modern scientific sense. They also, you know, are perfectly capable of interfering with the study of them. For instance, you know, I've had people who come to me and say, Dr. Gallagher, you know, you write about, you know, anomalous phenomena like levitation, like people speaking foreign languages. Why don't you videotape it? You know, now the Catholic Church, you know, I've dealt with a lot of different religions, but the Catholic Church is, you know, where I've had the most experience, and they regard number one as videotaping exorcisms, for instance, as a violation of privacy. But what I've also noticed, Jock, is that people who try to capture these things on videotape, often the videotape is interfered with.
Yeah.
So they'll say, well, Dr. Gallagher, I tried to videotape it. I had it on videotape, but then the videotape disappeared. So strange as it may sound, you know, we're not dealing with creatures who can interfere with our study of them, number one. So they make it difficult because, you know, on the one hand, they kind of want to attack and display themselves to certain people, but to other people, they are very happy that people are skeptical. So it's a very hard thing to study. And as I say to people, they're not like Hollywood actors that are you know eager to perform for the camera. They're just not going to do that.
You know, and it's interesting, I think people need to realize is that, and I tend to utilize this term spiritual intelligences or nefarious intelligences as I've used in terms as well as demonic, because they're a lot more intelligent than we are. And I've had this argument with many people where they say, well, you know, you can go in and prayers and cleanse or do this, or we can't, you know, why can't you catch them on video? Well, the millions of years, the thousands, I mean, not even time, the intelligence is beyond what we can even imagine. So the reality is whatever we try to do to circumnavigate in our own field of understanding, they're always going to be able to go beyond what we could even understand, which is why we need spiritual intervention, which is why we need holy intervention into these. And I find, and I know that you've found this many times, no matter what religion you are or what experiences you have, it always does tend to come back to the Catholic Church, because many other religions will approach the Catholic Church for help because they've had the most experience through the years.
Well, I don't want to be, you know, overly chauvinistic about it.
No,
Obviously,
no, I get it.
obviously, I'm not only a Catholic, but I'm a faculty member at a Catholic seminary, so I'm a very Catholic guy. And it is true that a lot of times when the worst cases come along, they wind up. And, I've seen this happen even from people in other religions, for instance. I had a very intelligent Hindu woman who was actually a physician. And she eventually had to turn to the Catholic Church to get the help that she needed.
Mm.
In terms of, getting back to the question of, evidence and how much you can videotape and all that, those are tricky issues. But I don't want to minimize the other side of the coin. When people say to me as a psychiatrist, well, Dr. Gallagher, how does it feel to be out of the mainstream? I say, what mainstream are you talking about? I say, number one, there are many mental health professionals around the world who believe in evil spirits. I mean, is it a majority? Probably not, but it's a significant number. But, if you talk about the beliefs of your average population, for instance, most Americans do believe in evil spirits.
Yeah.
Most people around the world believe in evil spirits. Maybe not in, more skeptical areas of the world, like Western Europe and stuff. But the vast majority of people in the world believe in evil spirits. And here's where I'll put on my professor hat, having studied the classics. Throughout history, almost everybody has believed in evil spirits.
Yeah.
So, in the Greco-Roman world, which was pagan and they believed in the gods and the goddesses, they knew that some spirits were dangerous and could attack them. In fact, one of the reasons Christianity spread in the Roman Empire is because what they found is that the Christian missionaries, following the authorization ultimately from Jesus to the apostles, that the Christian priest and exorcist had much more power, successful power, over evil spirits than their own pagan priests. Sort of like the story of Elijah in the Bible, if people know it, where he won a victory over 500 pagan priests. So I always have to emphasize that I don't feel like I'm out of the mainstream. I feel like modern materialists are the ones historically who are out of the mainstream, because that is not the way most people in history, and even most people in America, still think about the non-material world.
Yeah. I also think that there's a lack of I mean, obviously the history goes back ancient. I've read a lot about ancient Samaria, the belief in demons, the belief in evil spirits, and
right. It really was ubiquitous.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is what people don't understand.
In Samaria, Samaria was one of the earliest writing forms, and they left evidence that they believed in evil spirits. But so did the Babylonians, so did the Assyrians, so did the Greek world. We talk about the Greek world as being very rationalistic, and you had great philosophers like Aristotle and Plato. But they were also spiritual people. They not only believed in the divine, but they also believed in malignant spirits.
If you are enjoying this episode of Deadly Departed, then please share it with your colleagues or share it with your friends. And if you've got any ideas on anyone that you would like us to invite onto the podcast for an interview, then please let us know. Once again, thank you for joining us today. And please remember and subscribe. God bless. Why do you think, Richard, that so many people are neglect to accept the reality of evil spirits? So even in my field, and I'm not talking about mediumship, but even in my academic research in parapsychology, and I've had this argument a few times where they're like, there's so many explanations for anomalous phenomena. Yes, there is, but if you haven't experienced something like you've experienced and witnessed anomalous phenomena, I have as well. And so my conviction in knowing, I don't want to, and I use the term knowing rather than believing that there are evil spirits. It seems that the only way that you would accept it is if you experience it, and nobody really wants to experience anything like it because it scars you for life. But there's enough evidence throughout history that there is something else that's nefarious that's out there. And I always say to people, look, we only know evil because good exists. We only know hot because cold exists. And we only know light because dark exists. So why get to the point of denying the potential that evil is out there? And I know I've read a lot of papers in psychiatry and even in psychology and transpersonal psychology where they try to label evil as just some kind of mental construct that really isn't evil in its sense, but yet we know that it exists. What is truly evil?
Yeah, I mean, some of it is kind of human common sense. When we look at somebody like, Putin and Stalin and Hitler, I mean, I think the common sense view is that there was something very, evil being propagated by those people. Now, can you prove that? I mean, you can't prove it like 2 and 2 equals 4, but I think it's such a common human, commonsensical intuition that you just have to say if you don't believe in it, there's, I can't help you, But you're right too that for anomalous experiences, I mean, I know. I mean, I wrote a whole book about it. I know that
Yeah.
those experiences exist. Now, do you have to experience it yourself to truly believe in it? Well, I mean, I hope not, because that's why I and other people, write books, and it's not as if the evidence for this stuff is out there. It's just more sort of, what we call in medicine anecdotal evidence. It's people telling their stories, and there are thousands and thousands of people throughout history who have reported this stuff. So at what point do you say, there's not enough evidence? When people ask me, well, how come there's not more evidence? I say there's plenty of evidence, and I say, I'm not the one. I mean, yes, I reported my evidence. That's a big part of why I wrote the book.
Yeah.
But I say it's really up to God how much evidence He gives us. I mean, could He overwhelm us with, allowing demonic spirits to, propagate their evil? Could He, perform, much more miracles? Well, of course He could, but He gives a certain amount of evidence. It sounds a little, a little arrogant almost, but I always quote, the great Christian Catholic apologist as well as genius mathematician Pascal, and he said there is enough evidence to convince the true seeker, and he said there are enough shadows to confuse those people who don't really want to believe. Again, it sounds a little judgmental. I'm not a judgmental person. You can't be a good psychiatrist and be
No.
overly judgmental. But I think he was right that, it really depends on how people process the evidence because, the evidence is out there. I mean, there have been a number of, very wonderful writers, Christian and otherwise,
Yeah.
who have written about demonic possession throughout history. There was a German professor around the turn of early on in the 1900s who wrote a book with thousands of cases, that he felt were what you and I would call anomalous experience, sometimes of a dark nature. There's a friend of mine who's a wonderfully prolific biblical scholar. His name is Craig Keener. He not only wrote a magisterial modern book on miracles, but he also talks about, and I think he's working now on a book of literally hundreds and hundreds of cases of demonic attacks. I mean, these books are available
Yes,
for
they are.
people
Yeah.
to read. You don't, Craig Keener and this German guy named Osterreich. You don't have to take. I say you don't have to take Dr. Gallagher's word for it. Every couple of years I go to Rome, and we have this meeting, and there's 500 exorcists at the meeting, and they all have stories like my own. You don't have to believe me.
No.
Just any of those people you could talk to. Number one, and number two, they've written books themselves.
Yeah.
I'm going to get a little specifically Christian on you for a moment. I compare it to the following. When St. Paul, who had a experience of Jesus himself,
Yeah.
when he went to Corinth, which was a little bit like, going to a modern materialistic city, he said, you know, you don't have to believe me. He said, if Jesus didn't arise from the dead, he said, I'm a fool, because, I mean, many of these early Christians, they not only testified to their faith in Jesus' miracles and resurrection, but they got killed for it. I mean, St. Paul himself was beheaded. I mean, the guy was not going to be beheaded if he was lying about his stories. And what he said is to the Corinthians, he said, you know, Jesus appeared in the flesh. I mean, this wasn't some kind of, hallucination or vision. Jesus appeared
Fully
in the flesh.
objective. Yeah.
In the flesh, people could eat with him, people could touch him. He said he appeared to 500 people. And he said, Jock, many of those people are still alive. You can go talk to them. So, the idea that there isn't much evidence for both miracles and demonic phenomena is a very short-sighted view. And it's really more a judgment of people. Now,
Yeah.
I'm not saying, there are plenty of people, again, I'm not judging people. There are plenty of people who have never really been presented with the massive evidence. I mean, again, that's part of the reason I wrote my book, to give people an idea that here's a professor of psychiatry
Yeah.
who knows these people are not, psychotic or, imaginative or delusional. And yet there's all this evidence. I write about cases in the book of, a woman who levitated. I write about cases in the book of people go into a trance and they're speaking foreign languages. Or, as you see in your field of spiritualism, people who know things that they would never know otherwise. I mean, some kind of non-material, entities are obviously in evidence, and that to me seems unassailable. I mean, if you don't believe that, you don't really understand the field.
Do you
You
know
don't
it's interesting?
understand the evidence that's out there.
It's interesting because I have one of my favorite, the father of psychology, or people would argue is father of psychology, William James. And I love William James and the way he looks at things. And I can't remember word for word, but you go back to one of his quotes where he talks about the very fact that the position of demons is not spoken about is terrible, and that it will rear its head again, because he actually recognized that. I mean, from his understanding, way beyond looking at any archetypes from Carl Jung or anything, he understood it as a potential real subjective and objective issue. And I think you need to look back, even if you look, you go beyond any religion, you even look back at some of these scholars in parapsychology that believed it and would say it. And so William James is a perfect example. The other thing that I do want to kind of challenge maybe the Catholic Church on, and I think this is not challenge, but there's an issue. There's another. I'm not going to mention the book, but there's another book that I've studied and read in years past. And one of the things that I recognized is that the power of discernment seems to be lacking, even I think in the Catholic Church and Christianity, because there's a danger that you tend to see the demonic everywhere. I mean, there's books that I've read that have been written by religious scholars where it was getting to the point that this particular individual would be seeing a demon in a burger or in a demon in a, that. So this is why I really love, and anybody who hasn't read Demonic Force really should, because there is a lot of empiricism in it. There's empirical evidence. There's anomalous phenomena that's explained from a scientific perspective, but we also need to keep that education going, because there is the problem that people think they're possessed, they're not, and religious pastors, priests tend to also get to the point where they see demons everywhere. I think Gabriel Amorth was one. As much as I loved all his work and everything he did, I think he tend to see demons everywhere he went. And maybe there's a bit more discernment that's needed there.
Well, I actually think, Jock, you're talking more about Christian fundamentalists than Catholics. I mean, I know many Catholic priests. In fact, I knew Father Amorth while he was alive, and most of these priests, they're pretty educated guys. They're not jumping, by and large. There are a few exceptions, but they're not jumping to seeing demons everywhere. There are Christian fundamentalists who, you got to remember, Catholic priests do this as a ministry. They don't make money off of it. Once you get people who start to charge for their services, I tell people you should stay away from them like the plague. C.S. Lewis, who was a very, very educated and knowledgeable Christian, including about the demonic.
Yeah.
I mean, he had the classic passage that I think it was from the Screwtape Letters. He had a
Screwtape. Yeah, it's brilliant.
He had a classic passage which I quote in my book, which is that the demons are very happy when people don't believe in them. You know, but they're also happy when people get overly preoccupied and, as you put it, see the devil everywhere, or get immersed in trying to communicate with the devil. He said we have to avoid both extremes. And Lewis was not a Catholic, but a lot of his beliefs were very, very close,
absolutely,
to what the Catholic Church teaches. And I think his attitude,
was ahead. I think he was ahead of his time, Richard, actually, because I love that book. And if anybody hasn't read it, really, and you want to understand demonology, definitely the Screwtape Letters is there's a lot of wisdom and there's a lot of knowledge in there. And I think he was way ahead of his time.
Well, it's a paradoxical truth that on the one hand, I mean, demons do show their colors at times. In other words, the cases I write about, the possessions, the severe oppressions, even what we call the infestations. Those are the main categories of overt demonic attack. But it's interesting, at the same time, they sometimes do that to punish people, to sadistically, torture people, etc. At other times, they want to remain hidden. And it's almost like they have a strategy. You pointed out how very intelligent they are.
Yeah.
They are because, what we Catholics believe is they're fallen angels, and angels also are, very high intelligence. And it's interesting if you think about it, because it's also confusing to people. At times, they manifest themselves, and obviously, if you're attacked by an evil spirit, you tend to know it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Even though there are people who are delusional about it. But on
Yes.
the other hand, especially in the modern Western world, which is one of the few areas of the world in world history where people are skeptical of evil spirits, and they think, oh, all these people are just, psychotic and stuff. I mean, yes, it's true that, psychotic people can only imagine from their hallucinations that they're being attacked by spirits. But, that's precisely why, doctors like myself get involved in helping to discern these cases. But it's interesting at the same time that, you and I have experienced so many anomalous experiences that we
Yeah.
have no doubt that these things exist. And I have no doubt that evil spirits exist. On the
Absolutely
other
none.
hand,
Mm.
to a lot of other people in our modern society, they actually try to hide themselves. It's a tricky balance.
You know, it's funny because I've many people have come to me and they'll say, I saw this on a TV show or I saw this on a paranormal show and they're talking about dealing with demons and fighting them and I'm like, look, that's not real. Because the reality is if something seriously, if it was really diabolical, one, you'd be scarred for life. You would never ever forget it. It would constantly be in your mind and you would be taken and it's not a being like that is not going to come out on a TV show and show itself. And you've got to realize that this is all show. And when someone is really subjugated or an individual is subjugated by an evil presence, there is so much intelligence is behind it. They're not just going to come out and show themselves. And it takes a long time to identify and deal with these things and to discern it and that's, I think, where it's really important to educate the public on whatever their belief systems is what you really need to understand and the potential that is out there and not sensationalize it because I think demons are sensationalized and probably Hollywood hasn't done us any favors.
Well, what Hollywood gets wrong mostly is that, yes, they sensationalize it, and, that's to be expected. It's an entertainment media. But what they also get wrong is they tend to think of exorcism, Jock, as a magical ceremony,
Yeah.
as if you bring in the witch doctor.
I know.
The witch doctor does the mumbo jumbo, and the
Yeah.
problem goes away. Exorcism has to be understood, and it's understood by its best practitioners as a pastoral ministry. In other words, something has happened. Again, I'm not judging the people who get possessed, but something has happened that has brought this on the person. They've often turned to the occult, turned to even things like Satanism, which is rare but exists.
Yeah.
They've turned to something very evil in their life. I've had a number of gangsters who I've interviewed who, turned to some of these dark, cults to get success. And for a while they get success until they get caught or the police or even the demonic world turns on them. And then they have to reform their lives. It's not just, get an exorcism and the problem's gone. If they're genuinely possessed, they have to turn to God and reform their lives. That is part and parcel of the process of dealing with a possession. And that's what Hollywood often gets wrong because it acts like it's just a magic ceremony.
It does, and like the battle of good and evil, and there's a whole crescendo where, and then they don't realize that it continues, and it continues, and you need to work. It's interesting that you bring up though, because what a lot of people might not recognize, and I can't remember where I studied this, but it is in papers. Hitler did actually take part in he had an organization, I can't remember the name of it, but he had an organization where they took part in seances and they were looking at controlling and harnessing the power of the demonic to win World War II.
Yeah, I mean, it's like there are very few things in history that are not controversial, and
No.
I have met a few people who challenge the idea that Hitler was an occultist. But I think you're right, Jock. I think there is some evidence
There is. I've read it somewhere.
that he
Mhm.
turned to dark powers, which would also explain, why he not only had become an evil person, but had, propagated such enormous, evil on the human race, and especially on, marginal communities, on the Holocaust, and not just on millions of Jews, but on, Catholic priests and people who are defective. I mean, the evil almost cries out for some kind of explanation that he had, and I believe you're right that he had turned to some kind of dark spirits.
Oh yeah, he did. I can't remember. I mean, anybody who's listening, I will try and get back into my archives and find it and see if I can get it, because it is very interesting. History is very interesting if you understand or you're studying in any academic way the occult, and historical aspects of the occult. And I do think where I might have got it was when I was researching into the Kabbalistic life, because there was and I don't remember, but there was a Jewish individual during World War II that he did not kill because of the knowledge and the information or the potential insights that this person had. And this is where the information came from, that he was heavily involved not only in the occult but in satanic ritual and to control demonic for his own purposes. So and I'm sure he's not the last. I mean, dare I say, I potential other leaders are influenced by evil spirits. I'm absolutely positive with that, for sure, in
Yeah,
the world,
and
and I think
at the
it's
same
getting worse.
time, you have to heed your own warning that you don't want to blame everything on evil spirits.
No, exactly.
People are capable of evil on their own.
Yeah.
I mean, several categories of people in the book, I say, can often be confused as if they're possessed. One of them is, psychotic individuals, schizophrenics who, hallucinate these, voices from evil spirits or aliens or whatever. But, some of the other people are people who, are very suggestible and histrionic, but also people with severe personality disorders, for instance, sociopaths. Now clearly they're evil, but, have they actually turned to occultism? I mean, some have, but I think people are perfectly capable of evil on their own. So this is again why one has to be careful and draw these proper distinctions between people with
Yep.
emotional and character problems. I mean, we're all subject to temptations, and people can, that doesn't mean somebody is possessed. If they do some, evil in their lives, you have to make that distinction.
I think it's important for us to make a distinction as well of influence. Not everybody who is possessed by a demon, but doesn't mean they can't be influenced. Personally, I think, or I know that murderers out there are people that have carried heinous acts against humanity and against innocent individuals. There's been some cases in the past few years that we know I won't mention because I don't want to bring any to it, but I'm absolutely positive that there has been demoniacal influence in those lives, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a possession, but influence is just as bad. Influence, and if you're spiritually weak-willed, there's a potential that you can come under influence and under oppression by these intelligences.
Yeah, what you're often talking here about is again, the categories of truly
Yeah.
massive demonic attack tend to be oppression, possession, and infestation. But we're all subject to demonic temptation. And then, I mean, I would venture to say that, serious thinkers and theologians in this area, there is a debate about how much comes from our weak human nature and how much comes from demonic suggestion. I don't think anybody, has all the answers in that
No.
category. I think the great Catholic theologian Thomas Aquinas, said
Brilliant. Yeah.
something like, 10% of human evil is strongly suggested by evil spirits, and 90% is just because of our weak or fallen nature. That was one estimate by, a very knowledgeable Christian thinker, but I don't think anybody knows for sure.
No, absolutely. Richard, obviously, Demonic Foes is a brilliant book and is very kind of academically oriented as well. I love that. But are you working on maybe anything new that you might be bringing out as a follow up to this?
I do a lot of writing. I've written. In fact, I had sent you, Jock, an article we published with a woman theologian who was a critic of Hans von Balthasar. And, you reviewed it, and I mentioned you in the article as having an educated opinion that this particular modern, what I regard as a pseudo-mystic, was fooled and deceived by spirits. So I write a lot of technical works about that, a lot of articles. I am slowly working on a sequel to Demonic Foes.
Brilliant.
It really is about putting the category of demonic phenomena in a broader context and writing about not only that, but the paranormal in general and also the supernatural. As a doctor writing about miracles, and miracles are a very analogous experience to demonic phenomena in the sense that it's hard to pin them down and study it scientifically in a modern sense, but that these are genuinely real phenomena that can be discussed in an intelligent way. And, just as demonic phenomena exist, there have been many, many miracles throughout history. As I said, there's a friendly theologian of mine, Craig Keener, who wrote a very magisterial book on miracles. And, it's just, you read that book, it's called Miracles, and you read that book and
I'll get that. Yeah.
You read that book and you say, my God, there is so much more evidence for this than I ever thought. So, as a doctor, I have been interested in that, and I talked to people who've experienced miracles in their lives. And so I thought I would write a broader book on, both the supernatural and the what we call the preternatural, things that go beyond, natural explanations.
I love that. I can't wait till you do that. That comes out.
You're going to have to wait a while because this, I'm a busy guy, and
I know you are. Yeah.
I'm still a very active psychiatrist and teacher.
You are.
I teach at 3 different institutions, so I have to scrounge to find the time to write this book. But eventually I'll get it to you, and you'll be one of the first to get a signed copy. Okay.
Excellent. I can't wait to do that. I can't wait to read that. I as always, Richard, I love chatting with you and your work, and essentially, nobody knows this. It's actually one of the reasons that I went down an academic path was because of Richard Gallagher, because of Dr. Gallagher, who at one point told me I was getting closer, getting too old, that I better get a move on if I was going to head toward an academic career. And so I did. I took his advice, and I've gone down that path.
I encourage that because
exactly.
You're an intelligent guy. Now, I'm not going to hide the fact, Jock, that you and I don't agree on everything.
No, we don't, and that's the beauty. We can discuss and we can meet each other.
You are someone who does believe in evil spirits. We have that in common, and that's a big part of why I think your work can be productive, and as you study it academically, hopefully you'll you'll put down.
Absolutely. I think, since me writing Deadly Departed and you supporting my work in Deadly Departed, I now look back at it, Richard, and I'm like, oh my God, there has to be a part 2. It has to be more academically sound, and it has to be broader. I think that's what's given me the interest to go even deeper into widely. And I think it's important as well to educate the public from an academic point of view, because for me, empirical evidence is everything in everything that we do. And if we can strive toward getting that evidence, and even if we can bring in, I'm passionate about bringing in science and spirituality in some way that we can create a bridge between both, and that we can begin to maybe even get some lived experience with empirical evidence, some patterns of evidence that might help us to break boundaries and actually maybe even look at categorizing things differently.
Well, you see, I see that as a perennial need. And again, it's not as if, you got to remember, Pope John Paul II wrote an encyclical called Fides et Ratio, which is faith and reason. And, certainly many Christians and other religions too, feel there is no contradiction between faith and reason. This idea that, we should take it all on faith and not use the brain that God gave us. And, the Catholic tradition, of course, is very, very committed to the idea that both faith and reason are important. So that's not a new idea.
Yeah, no, it's not.
What I think you're saying is, in today's world, these fields have sometimes been bifurcated, and that it is important that thinkers who are knowledgeable about both fields, bring to the public the idea that you can study this stuff rationally, even stuff of a non-materialist nature.
Absolutely. Richard, thank you for being my guest again on Deadly Departed. Always a riveting conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just show you one more time. If you haven't read Demonic Foes, I do recommend you get it. It is brilliant. One of my favorite books, because it does have a very scientific grounding in there. And it's a book, you don't have to believe in everything, but it's a book that's going to make you think. And if it makes you think, it might make you want to research, and you might come to your own conclusions in life and whatever you do. As always, if you've got any questions, please reach back out to us at deadlydeparted.co or Paranormal Daily News. Remember also that we are launching our new peer-reviewed journal, where we will be distilling the academic and making the academic available to everyone out there to help understand this and more anomalous phenomena. And hopefully, if I can convince Richard may join us on maybe a religious experience editorial side of things. But as always, Richard, it's fantastic chatting with you, as we often do. And I can't wait to have you back on. We go into this more, and I can't wait till you do a new book, the next episode, if you like, of Demonic Foes. Thank you for being
Demonic
on.
Foes is easily available, and it's still selling pretty well. So I don't want to write a competing book quite yet. But I'm not a materialistic person, but I do think that it's a valuable contribution to the field.
Oh, it is 100%. It is. I recommend it to lots of different people. It's on our site. Go back and listen to the first episode that Richard and I did as well. It's fantastic, and it's also on Audible. I think we've got it. I think I got it on Audible as well.
The Audible version is great.
The Audible version is fantastic.
When HarperCollins proposed an Audible, I didn't like the voices they sent me, so I asked this guy whom I know, who's a Shakespearean actor.
It's brilliant.
He did a marvelous job. So if you like an Audible version,
it is great. I've got it on Audible. I've got it on Kindle. I've got it on hardback. So I've got it on all.
Thanks for the mention and the compliment, Jock. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Andrew, God bless, Richard. I shall speak to you very soon, my friend. God bless. If you have enjoyed this episode, then we would love you to review us on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, or any other podcast app. Reviews mean a lot to us and they help us to reach more people. If you've got any questions, then also reach out to us. Thank you and God bless.